Hi everyone. Welcome to 155 Freeman Street for this afternoon, and thank you all for your patience as well. My name is William Smith. I'm a senior editor of Triple Canopy, and along with Lucy Ives over there in the corner, a co-organizer of this event, which is called Automatic Reading. And we've described this afternoon as a seminar addressing the act of reading as a part of contemporary artistic practice. And we've brought together artists, poets, and performers. Erica Baum, and maybe like if I say your name, just raise your hand so that people can say Erica Baum, Franklin Bruno, Corina Copp, Jim Fletcher, Ariana Reines, Monica de la Torre, and Rebecca Coitman. We're here to discuss, as I said, the act of reading, especially the way in which reading has been informed by the history and legacy of conceptual art. The charge for the afternoon goes something like this. Reading is frequently understood as a private encounter with characters, narratives, and perhaps an author. Reading in the context of conceptual art, in contrast, may underscore the material qualities of the codex, the page, the binding, and technologies of printing, or cultural assumptions about readers and authors, which are bound up with the physical format of the book. Rather than producing meaning necessarily, reading in a conceptual sense may become an encounter with an object, an audience, or social context, or with discourse itself. So hopefully we can address some of these questions this afternoon. Before we begin, let me go into a little more depth on the background of each one of our participants, and then turn the floor over to Lucy. So Corina Copp, who is to my right here, is the author of a poetry pamphlet, Pro Magenta Be Met, from Ugly Duckling Press in 2011. And she's currently working on a three-part performance called The Whole Tragedy of the Inability to Love, based on the work of Marguerite Duras. The first installment of that is going to be presented this year's Prelude Festival. Erica Baum is an artist living and working in New York. She's had numerous solo exhibitions, including at Bureau, New York. And her work will be included in the upcoming, is included in the group exhibition Postscript, Writing After Conceptual Art at the Museum of Contemporary Art, Denver. And I need to get back to that in a second. Franklin Bruno is a writer and musician based in Jackson Heights, Queens, and an author of the article Wouldn't It Be Milkovit? Milkovit, yeah, all right. A multimedia analysis of My Fair Lady and its localized parodies, which will be included in an upcoming issue of Triple Canopy. Ariana Reines is a poet and a translator. She's the author of works such as The Cow, Mercury, and the play Telephone, and she's translated numerous works, mostly from French, including books by Tikkun and Charles Baudelaire. She has worked with Triple Canopy before, including the program series Miscellaneous Uncatalogued Material at the Museum of Modern Art. Jim Fletcher has worked with Richard Maxwell, New York City Players, for more than 12 years, most recently in early plays, and he's also a member of the cast of GATS with the Elevator Repair Service. The Elevator Repair Service production based on The Great Gatsby. And in 2012, he received an Obie Award for Sustained Excellence in Performance. Monica de la Torre is a poet and editor. She's the author of poetry collections, including Talk Shows and Public Domain. She is a translator also. She lives and works in Brooklyn and is the senior editor of Baum magazine. And then finally, Rebecca Coitman is a painter living in New York City. She has been included in numerous group exhibitions, solo exhibitions, including Whitney Biennials, and she's led shows at Miguel Brave Gallery, Gladstone Gallery, and then the Daniel Foucault Gallery in Cologne. She is working on an artist book called Spine, or was working on an artist book called Spine, which was published in 2011. I mentioned the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver and the exhibition Postscript that Erica Baum is a part of. This is one of the impetuses for this project. We've been collaborating with the Museum of Contemporary Art Denver and want to give them thanks for supporting us in that collaboration. This afternoon is actually the second part of an ongoing series that we're calling Corrected Slogans, which will result in a publication called Corrected Slogans. So just so you know, this is all being recorded, it will be transcribed and then published as part of the book. The first part of this collaboration, which we held last month, called Poems for America, produced one of the main questions that we want to get at this afternoon. And so maybe I'll turn it over now to Lucy Ives to start the discussion.
Sure. Okay. Thank you, Will. So as Will just said, on September 15th we had what we called a symposium here, in which we invited poets and artists to come and talk a little bit about writing, essentially. Even the visual artists were kind of talking about writing. So this afternoon is more about reading, but maybe about writing as well. And in the second panel of that symposium, there was a question that was posed, and I'd like to just kind of read that for you now, because we'll open up our conversation today with that. So this is a question that was addressed to Matvey and Mikhailovich, who was on the panel with Michael Koris, and the commenter asked about a reading that Matvey had given 8 years ago with Dmitry Krygov, where Krygov said that the project of writing 20,000 poems was actually the easy part of his work, and he'd come to realize that the difficult part was finding someone to read all of the poems. And the gist of the question was, conceptualism. Is there a specific kind of reader that's being created or imagined here? Is it a problem? And Matvey responded, I think it may indeed become a problem as conceptual works grow in size, which they seem to be doing at the moment. There's this modernist authority in creating a big tome. What that work is doing is asking you to look and think. Making this huge material object is trying to say, we're not actually interested in reading it. There's a paradox there, but the point of it is to get away from a kind of understanding of literature that necessitates a reader. It is a little bit scary to me to suggest that there should be no communication between writer and audience rather than some kind of conversation. But there is a way in which some of this new conceptual work could open up. There have been interesting precedents in the past of opening up writing to a more conversational place and more of a place of exchange rather than a monolithic, here's a project, think about it, don't read it. I'm curious where things will go. Part of the motivation of a lot of these new conceptualist books is to find a reader that will engage that work, and actually, through the engagement, something else might occur. So it is a recapitulation of an avant-garde activation of the reader. But I'm not sure that it's working. But I am interested in ways that activation might work. I think that people are looking for another way of making a reader. And the commenter then said, it sounds like Frankenstein, like, quote, we are going to make a reader. I don't know if there was some inflection there, but I think I'd like to open the conversation now by asking you all to respond both to this equation of illegibility, or kind of intimidating illegibility of some works, with something that comes to us out of modernism, or the ambitions of modernism, and this idea of other ways of reading that Matvey makes reference to a book that wants or needs a reader, or what he's describing as a kind of a conversational mode. Sorry about that.
Yeah, that was an interesting thing, the exchange that you had about that. And my first thought about that is that reading is the thing that happens maybe it requires an author or a writer or an artist or something, but the thing that happens is the reading. And so if you have a tome that's gigantic, or if you have an array of information that's impossible to, or somehow daunting to penetrate as a reader, well, then what's happening when you look at it, or when you perceive it, or when you deal with it? That's the reading that happens. That's my initial thought. It's just sort of a question.
I would say that with conceptual art, to me, was this process to take the materiality out of the art object and realize that wasn't necessary exactly to function as an art object, that you could just literally use words and write it. So this is sort of the inverse. It's bringing the words back into the object. Because the only interesting, desirable thing to do with that would be to look at it as a bound, or however it's put together, as an object that contains words, not to be read, I would say. So, but I think it's actually really impossible not to read right now. That's my big issue with reading.
What do you mean by that?
Because I just think that everything has to have a certain kind of legibility now to function at all. I mean, I'm mostly speaking about visual art, but I think it applies to everything. There has to be a kind of instant legibility about it on the surface.
Yeah. There's like for the archive, there's like a kind of wobble, it seems to me, within that, which is that things, text or all inscriptions have to come with a certain degree zero of legibility now, and yet there's a difference between reading and seeing, and I would say that most of the kind of reading that we do is actually seeing, and even if you think of the way that friends speak about, oh, I saw your blankety blank. I have a friend who was recently panned in some major magazine, and everybody was complimenting her for praising her because they had seen that she had appeared in it. And these aren't illiterate people, but I think there's something about that we have to be really attentive to right now.
I've also been thinking about the relationship of how you look at a visual piece, say an abstract piece, and then when you look at a non-objective abstract work, painting, there's no one way to start looking at it. You look in any, like there's no beginning, middle, end. You're free to encounter it in any way. So in a way, I think of, say, a large tome that's a conceptual piece, it's inviting you to enter it, and again, without necessarily beginning at the beginning. It's not linear. So there's a different, so there's no way to say you've completed it. Just like when you look at an abstract painting, you don't say I've finished it when you look at it. You just look at it.
Like the way the internet is a large tome that's a conceptual place or piece.
Just working off what you just said, Erica. I'm thinking of, and you, Rebecca, there's like a porousness to the book now. And it really, especially these books that portend to not want to be read, of course, what is wanting to be read, and we all are reading it, and that's why we're talking about it now, is the gesture. So it just makes me wonder, like, there's a complication between what the actual writing is. Is the writing what's in the book, or is the writing that inscription in the narrative of what the book can contain? And so then that inscription of what a book can be is written not in that particular volume, but it's a gesture of making a book of that nature. And it's reading, and I really don't worry about the reader. I mean, I don't think it's going to disappear. Any form of writing will posit interest, will keep eliciting more and more kind of unprecedented ways of reading, but reading just can't go away. I mean, it's a scriptural society. So it all depends also on volumes of writing and discourse to actually be legible.
I do worry about the reader, I guess. I think a lot of what these gestural, like the aspect of these tones being so gestural is indicating it's sort of actually a very private reading experience still. I know Matt Bay commented on like discourse and conversation becoming the reading almost, but it seems to me that it is still a very private experience, even though because we're aware of all of that discourse and all of that conversation and acknowledging that it is just maybe often a seeing, and I think that there is a nervousness like within going to see something when you see a performance and reading these sorts of texts and I can't speak as much to the visual, but aligning sort of your emotionality and your seeing and your hearing and all of these faculties at once, I think is asking a lot of the reader.
So how do you explain why you worry about this?
I guess because I feel like so much is, all of these things are not in sync with each other according to like this like writerly gesture of like creating, a book like Traffic or something. That's like a very just like specific concrete gesture to say like I'm recording all these things and now it's actually asking less of the reader in a way, and yet readers we want to engage, and yet it might even feel like kind of a luxury to sit around with that book and to really try to engage with like who has time to do that. And that could apply to a lot of things. And so I guess maybe not yet. But
well, it's kind of like if you have an audiobook on and it's just playing like the radio and you're not listening, then how are you taking it in or?
So I've been really thinking about this, about reading becoming actually a space that's a condition for listening also. Can you say more about that? Please. No.
Well, maybe we could expand it. I mean, we've been talking about the relationship between reading and looking, but definitely it's more than that. I mean, there's like sound as well,
right.
Physical.
Right, and that's sort of like what would be really wonderful to continue engaging, and that's why I like that there's so many diverse practices here, because we can do that, and like you're saying, text can become like a text image, or is only available to see or to use in a performance, or to and I don't know. I think there's other things that we need to align ourselves with, like going back into that being like a private practice.
It seems like maybe we should talk a little bit about like manuscript culture, biblical commentary, Gutenberg. Like, are these things that we need to talk about? Like, I don't know why I felt like that was on the horizon of what Corey were just speaking about, but like the space of reading and like the notion of luxury, the question of what one spends one's time trying to decipher, and those kinds of questions, they seem related to this whole, I don't know.
I think the when you bring up the issue of time, that's a very important thing that might distinguish reading from seeing. Because when you read, you engage, and it goes, it starts, it's like a record almost. It goes in a sort of linear way. You say scriptural. So when you read a book, you are, intending to follow that trail, of the way it's read. You're not looking at a field of letters. you're following a path, and that's what, you know, narrative is very is a very clear manifestation of that. But poetry also is, of course, you can experiment with other ways of doing poetry, but that thing of time, and that reminds me of the thing we did the reading of Making of the Americans here in this room a while ago. And the thing that struck me most was how clear the piece was when it was read out loud in a room, because, and it's a little harder to get into it by yourself, but when we're all here, and then you play it, we're playing it really, and one person took off where the other one stopped, took up where the other one left off. And then you realize, and Gertrude Stein's particular case, in that particular book, the use of time was very clear. You know, it's like she would stay in a subject for a certain amount of time, and so you really, while we were listening, I mean, we were in that for a time, and she even said, and I'm waiting for this other subject to come up, but it's not coming up yet. So I'm going to keep talking about this guy and about and she'd say it over and over again. But these were problems. Maybe when you're this solitary act of reading, but somehow that's a different issue. In a group, though, that thing really happened. But that question of time as an element of reading is interesting.
I just add that there's some books that the notion of the book is something that you start at the start of and finish at the end of. That's one kind of book, right? But there are some other kinds of books that are not necessarily always as associated with the literary. We don't. There's not many A to Z dictionary readers. Auto repair manuals, recipe books. Although I like to read books more than I like to use them. And it seems like there are some strategies or some projects that are engaged in that. What they do with reading a text is they demonstrate that the reading has not been done or doesn't need to be done in order. There's something of that even in Erica's work. It kind of creates a simultaneity, right, at moments of the book that are nominally, right, after, before, and after one another. So those things can be disordered as well. It may be more difficult in a way to inscribe that in, to make that explicit in the structure of something one is attempting oneself than it is to do that with something else. So perhaps that's one reason that these projects come about.
Can I just, I think I'm maybe going to paraphrase a little bit or just pull something out of what you said. I'm wondering if it seems like we're taking the literary book, which is sort of something that's in the minority, I think, among all books. I have no idea. But we're taking, when we say book, we really mean that, though, a little bit here. Am I correct about that? Or we mean... Or the Bible. Yeah, maybe we mean the Bible, but that's kind of...
Which people do use in a non-linear way, too, right?
But when we're saying book, I mean, are we thinking literature, and...
I mean, it seems like everybody here automatically, that's the default position, right? It's fascinating. And we're all thinking that texts necessarily in the book form are linear. But clearly it's not always the case. Maybe I shouldn't ask this, but I'll just put it out there, and then if you want, we can talk about it. If not, we won't. I'm just curious to what happens when you are confronted with a text that does not require that kind of involvement from you as a reader. So, like, we all know what the discourse, for instance, behind concrete poetry is, right? Is the attempt to liberate the reader. And whenever we encounter that, it's always from the point of view of the person producing that discourse. But since we're sitting here talking about reading, I'm just really curious about what happens to you when you are presented with material that demands a very different approach. Like how, yeah. No, like Erica's book, for instance, or concrete poetry. I have a lot of material that I brought also. I could just show you one maybe. I'll give you an example. I've been working on Latin American poets of the 70s that were intervening the book. Maybe, I don't want to talk about this one because it's really kind of, we can talk about it later if it comes up, but just keep going, like, okay, yeah, maybe, okay, this is great. This is a diptych. This is called The Next Page. And it's the first one that you state. And so it's called The Next Page, and what it says is, it's basically an exercise for the reader. So you see the picture, and it says, imagine that the cyclists that you're watching the picture are traveling at a speed, an average speed of 40 kilometers per hour. B, calculate how many kilometers these cyclists have traveled from the moment you picked up the book. C, calculate how many more kilometers they will be traveling till the moment you put down the book. No, you forget this book. That's a B. And then the next one is called The Previous Page. And it has a wonderful quotation by UNESCO that says, like, we have, what is it? Like, we have eyes, and our eyes point ahead, and we lack eyes on our back, but curiously we cannot see the future, we can only see the past. And then the exercise proposed here is to calculate how many inches the Tower of Pisa will continue leaning when you're actually engaging with the book and reading. That's the gist of it. So if you're presented with that kind of book, as a reader, he's trying to liberate you from reading linearly, right? He's trying to engage you imaginatively. And you can do whatever you want in replying to the book. He's almost hinting at the fact that this is from a book called the New Novel, and there's nothing novelistic about it. There's nothing narrative. So it's almost like the poem or the pieces are not those, but the result of your engagement with the material. So these are just prompts for the poem to happen.
It's kind of like a reflexive mirror to the event of your reading.
Right.
In a way.
Yeah.
But is it one artist? Is it both artists?
No, it's Juan Luis Martinez.
Well, your description of that what's on the page is not the poem happens elsewhere, that's more of a classically capital C historical conceptualist kind of position, right? About art. This is the mere vehicle, right? And I think I'm sorry, I don't know how to refer to you except by your initials.
Oh, Rebecca.
Rebecca. To go back to something that I think is important one of the first things Rebecca said is that part of that one part of the prompt that this reading in the context of conceptual art may underscore the material qualities of the codex, the page binding and technology. I mean, this is a funny kind of reversal, as you said, of what we associate with conceptual art in the context of it being a term in the history of visual art, right? Where the idea was let's try to detach the artistic or aesthetic content from the sensual qualities, the perceptual qualities of this painted surface. Whereas it seems to me, not that this is the only strategy that we're interested in and we're talking about here, but this notion that I find the use of the term conceptual a little funny, right? Because when we get involved with doing these things or talking about books in this other way, we're reinscribing the sensual and the material into something that, from a certain point of view, was conceptual all along, right? Reading. So, and I don't mean to make that sound like, oh, I found a conceptual confusion, right? But it seems worth thinking about the distinctions that are relative to genre and medium that are involved in using this term. But it's interesting that this is considered to be in a literary context, right? I mean, even though it's, as you say, it says it's a novel, but it's not novelistic.
Right.
But this is more like the sort of conceptualism classic, right?
I want to jump in really bad. Because for me, the thing about book culture, it goes back to romance and seduction, the romance, the romance of the rose. That's what I meant by like the beginnings of book
culture, the way that I see it, is not so much about linearity as seduction. And this guy is trying to seduce you with math problems, which works for some. What intrigues me about the book is the book is a kind of organ of seduction. It's just something that's closed that you might open. And what calls you to open it? It can be many things, and that is extremely. I mean, of course, that's fundamentally conceptual, but it's not. I think this notion that the reader was not free is now a quaint notion. Like none of us is free. Nobody's free. Not the writer, not the reader. We're all born eating shit, and we'll die, whatever, on this world of whatever. I just think it's sort of like a charming idea to free the reader, just as it is a charming idea that the writer might think he or she will free him or herself by producing text. I don't know.
Well, I also think that when I have a fiction, a novel, I feel bad if I don't finish it. It just bothers me. And it started, and then sometimes I start something I don't like and I think I'm not going to read it, and then I keep reading and then I love it, so I think I'm glad I didn't give up. But then sometimes I'm not reading something else because I feel bad that I should be reading this. And but so in a way, something like this, in terms of reading, this is freer because I don't feel the same. I don't have the same. Yeah. So I can look at this and I can open it up and I can play with it.